please give a warm welcome to Rupert Reed. I forgot to say, he's also brought some of his books with him today, which will be on sale after the talk.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here today. Why are you here today? I mean here, in this room. Are you here for pleasure? Maybe not. Is this you? You feel very concerned. You're feeling it. I suspect that's why you're here. You think that things are probably a lot worse than a lot of people realize, and maybe a lot worse than you've been told. You really want to do something meaningful about it. Perhaps you are already really doing something meaningful about it. Or perhaps you're not entirely certain whether it's the thing you could be doing, which is the best thing to be doing under the circumstances. And you probably feel like there aren't enough other people who are doing what you're doing or doing the things that really need to be done. Let me offer an attempted summary. Is this you? There's a growing realization at the moment that when it comes to climate, things are worse, much worse than we thought. Last summer's 40-degree heat wave was a wake-up call for a lot of us. Protesters have raised the alarm, but blocking streets is not going to work anymore. Politicians are pretending it isn't happening while oil giants are making record profits. We're all trying to do our bit in our own lives, but we're missing clear leadership and a collective voice. It's becoming clearer and clearer, in fact, that we desperately need a grown-up response from people across all walks of life that's not full of either false hope or only despair, but is brave enough to tell the truth and accelerate action in our communities, workplaces, and on the global stage. Does that get a nod from you? Yes. Getting quite a few nods. That I just read out is the proposition that we in the Climate Majority Project used in the audience research that we recently did with a series of focus groups of people with some level of climate concern that got the best overall response. And they got a very strong positive response. About 80% of people said something like, yeah, that's how I feel. One of the things that's really interesting and striking about that proposition is it starts with this quite strong statement. There's a growing realization at the moment that when it comes to climate, things are worse, much worse than we thought. So isn't that interesting? A very large percentage of the population think that things are worse, much worse than we thought. And they're willing to hear that, and for that to be part of a message which vibes with them and which they're prepared to act on the basis of. Quite a significant number of people in these focus groups said to us at the end, I would join an organisation that was set up like that. A few of them literally came to the people in charge of the focus groups, who were professional market researchers, and said, can you put me in touch with the people who wrote that, the Climate Majority people? I want to join. And apparently that virtually never happens in professional market research focus groups. Here's another one. This one was the other one which also got a very high percentage of people buying in. And I'm reading this now because this one makes a bit more explicit what we want to do. As the Earth's climate deteriorates, people from all backgrounds are finding ways to help. The climate majority, that's us, but it's also you, the climate majority wants to bring together an alliance strong enough to make sure future generations can live on a healthy planet. We help people from different jobs, different social classes, different political views to understand the gravity of the situation and find their place in the solution. Our leaders have failed to act. Protesters have raised awareness. Scientists are doing their best to create clean technologies. But it's going to take everyday people coming together as communities, parents, and citizens to make the grown-up decisions we need in our workplaces, cities, and countries. Is this you? We've been told for a long time that we shouldn't scare people, that if we tell people the truth, they'll be too demoralized to take any action. But what we believe is that isn't true. We believe that there is a climate majority already out there, And that's not just our belief, right? That's also present not just in our own research, but in opinion polls, which show widespread concern. We think that what needs to happen is that concern needs to be deepened by closer engagement with the truth and activated. People need to be offered on-ramps into action that they can take, that feels like it's meaningful, significant, that added up, it would add up to something like enough. And we think this is possible. We've constructed this thing called the Climate Majority Project, which aims to turn the climate majority that already exists into one which is deeper and one which is activated. And we think that this could actually be enough. But how do you do this? So I've already given you some clues. We talk about there being 4 strands to the transformation of this climate majority into one which is deepened and activated. The first strand is truthfulness. People cannot operate in a way which is going to be adequate to the situation unless they know what that situation is. And when people do find out what the situation really is, then they're scared. They are, in some cases, grief-stricken. They are angry. That leads into the second strand. Those emotions need to be handled. They need to be processed. If you just dump a bit of truth on people and don't give them any way to process it, don't give them any way to turn it into something that they can deal with, well, then they will probably get into a place of despair or a place of cynicism or into a place of overwhelm. But if people are given the opportunity to look at it together and think it through and feel it through together, we think that that is not inevitable. And that opportunity can take many forms. We could do a little bit of it here this afternoon. We do, in the Climate Majority Project, specific sort of workshops where people do some of this together. There are many other contexts for it. Some people do it in therapy, in group therapy. But the point is, there has to be a way of processing, of handling difficult truths, difficult emotions, and typically of doing it together, which in itself breaks out of the idea that one is alone in this. So the first strand is truthfulness. The second strand is ways of handling and processing the truth, building a culture of resilience. And we think this is non-negotiable. This has to be part of what there is. When you have that first strand and that second strand combined, that leads into the third strand, which is action, on-ramps into realistic, pragmatic action that everyone can engage in. What kind of things do I have in mind? Well, some of it is stuff that some of you are already doing, for certain, stuff that is represented at this fair today. And we believe that one of the ways which is most salient for people to get involved in action is to get involved in building resilience on the physical scale, on the community scale, and not just on the psychological scale, right? Once you've built some psychological resilience, that needs to translate also into resilience of your community. What kind of things does that mean? It means things like local food growing. It means things like local water harvesting. And it means building community networks of various kinds that can turn that into a community resource. Why is this so important? It's important because of the difficult times that we are moving into. This summer we are likely to see temperatures around the world break even more records than last year. We had the shocking 40-degree heat last summer. I'm sorry to have to tell you, if you weren't already aware, that what happened last year was under world conditions of what the meteorologists call La Nina, which means more than usually cold conditions around the world. So last summer's record-breaking heat was more than usually cold. Okay, right. So what's it going to go when we flip into the opposite, which is El Nino, which is likely to happen this summer? We're going to see even more records going. We need to build local resilience to look after ourselves, to take care of ourselves, because our governments don't have this. Our leaders haven't got this. But it has this massive ancillary benefit, which is that it wakes people up. Right? When people see other people engaging in the construction of community resilience, engaging in adaptation to changed and declining climatic conditions, it registers in their minds and they think, they're actually adapting to what's here and the worst stuff that is coming. Therefore, it must be real. You don't adapt to something unless it's real. If we always talk about 2030, 2050, we have these dates in the future by which we have to reduce emissions by, and people are always kind of half thinking, well, this is a problem for tomorrow, this is a problem for my children, etc. If we adapt, if we build resilience, we're responding to a problem which is now, a problem which is imminent. Adaptation, community adaptation, resilience building, preparedness is a mind bomb. It slowly explodes in people's minds and it wakes them up and they realize that this is real. We have to get real in our response to it. We can't outsource that any longer. And that's a central theme here. People have been told and taught in so many ways to trust others to take care of this. The scientists will take care of it. The engineers will take care of it. The corporates will take care of it. Our political leaders will take care of it. If all of those people fail, then the activists, they'll take care of it. No one's going to take care of it. No one is taking care of it. We have to take care of it. The outsourcing has to end somewhere. Building community together, building resilience together is a very strong way of showing that we're not outsourcing it any longer. And it's something that everybody can do. So that's a key venue for the third strand of our way of seeing how change can happen. But there are other possibilities for action which could be also equally significant or perhaps even more so. When I arrived in Sevenoaks this morning, I thought, yeah, it is quite leafy, isn't it? There are some quite big houses here. There are some quite nice-looking, swanky cars. There's money around here. If you happen to be one of those people who has money, that might be an even more significant way that you can contribute. The audience research survey that I told you a little bit about that we've done in the Climate Majority Project, this was funded by a person who's an academic like me. He's just a guy. Just a guy who lives fairly frugally and so saves money into his bank account every year. And just said, I'll give you a 5-figure sum so you can do this research. So, if any of you happen to have £10,000, £1,000, £100,000 lying around, please consider putting it to use. Because you can't take it with you, and you can't eat it, and unless we effect an extraordinary transformation within the next generation, it'll only be good for creating a campfire with out of those banknotes. So please do think about that. And think about the extraordinary way in which an amount of money like that can make a real difference in the world. One tiny story which might impress some of you on that score. My friend Caroline Lucas became an MP partly because Brighton Green Party had built up a record of success over a period of years. How had they done so? Well, lots of people had done lots of hard work, but also one woman had left her flat in her will to Brighton Green Party, and that gave them about 20 times as much income as they had previously had. And with that, they were able to hire a bunch of staff, and that's how they got a bunch of councillors elected, and that's how Caroline Lucas got elected. It all might not have happened if this one woman hadn't left her flat in her will to Brighton Green Party. That's a way in which one person can really help change the world. Or some of you, rather than working in your community or giving away money, which you may or may not have a job which could be really significant in the kind of changes that need to be coming. So in the Climate Majority Project, we incubate organizations that we think are especially potentially powerful in making this transformation come about. So we incubate an organization called Community Climate Action, which does what I described a few minutes ago. We also incubate an organization called Lawyers for Net Zero. So this is corporate lawyers who are trying to hold their own companies to account, to stick to climate targets, to get more ambitious climate targets, to preemptively guard against legal action against them in years to come, etc. If you are a lawyer or an insurer or an auditor or any one of quite a number of professions where there is an obvious potential relation to this issue of issues in your life, in your working life, then it might be that the most significant way that you can contribute is through your work. So consider that. We think that lawyers organizing as lawyers, insurers organizing as lawyers, actors organizing as actors, we're also incubating a group of actors who are trying to transform their profession and get a load of art and media content made which is about this crisis, which has hardly been done yet. You know, where is the great epic TV series about the different possible futures that are opening up before us? Where is it? It doesn't exist yet. That is an absolute scandal from an artistic perspective and also from the perspective of the human race. If you are somebody who is in a profession or a job or a business which can make a real difference, that might be the most significant way that you can use your life. But what we're inviting each and every person to do is to think, how can I contribute the most, along with other people? That is crucial. Don't try and do it by yourself. Along with other people, to making this transformation into a reality. There's been this kind of belief that if you engage with the truth of the climate crisis, then either you get overwhelmed and give up, or you have to glue yourself to the M25. And we think that's wrong, right? We think that we're getting to a point now where more and more and more people, in fact, a majority, are starting to realize that there's no incompatibility between understanding the truth and taking maximum serious action that you think will actually be effective in your life. On the contrary, they naturally go together, provided you have the processing and the handling, and providing you're given the meaningful opportunities to work with other people to make this transformation. And then we come to the fourth strand, which is not an obvious one, but in some ways the most important one of all in my belief. And that is the strand that we call sense-making, or a shared understanding of what is going on. And that goes like this. So, we wake up to, we face the truth, we process it together, we find meaningful on-ramps into action. The fourth element is understanding that this is happening already, and it's going to happen more and more, and it's going to scale up, and seeing it, starting to see it spreading and popping up all over the place, and realizing that you are part of the climate majority, that we are coming to self-awareness, that this is an inevitable development, this is a necessary development, this is a hugely exciting development. It's an incredibly meaningful time to be alive, and the only questions are, what's our individual place in it? How wise will we do this? How wisely will we do this? Will we do it fast enough, etc.? These are the questions, not is it going to happen, should it happen? Of course it should happen, and yes, it is going to happen, it's already happening. The question is, what's your place in it, and how good is it going to be, and how quick is it going to be? So this fourth strand, the shared understanding of being part of this thing, which is gradually and not so gradually coming to self-awareness, is, in my opinion, in some ways the most exciting of all. That is the Climate Majority Project. My suggestion to you is that simply by virtue of the fact that you're in this tent, it's absolutely obvious that you are part of the climate majority. And what we have to do is do these four things together and realize that more and more of us are going to do them together. And if we do all of that, then we actually have a chance of creating a decent future, as opposed to the hellscape which this planet will be in a generation or two if we don't. And that's my proposition to you here this afternoon. And now I'd love to have a discussion about it with you. Thank you.
Rupert, just to start us off, could you just say a bit more about the Climate Majority Project, because it hasn't actually launched yet, right?
Yeah.
So we haven't heard of it before.
Yeah. So a bunch of us have been planning this for a couple of years. Some of us come out of XR, some of us come from other places. We are academics, journalists, marketers, web experts, etc. A huge panoply of people are behind this, including John is involved, John Alexander, which is fantastic. And those of us who are at the heart of this, we're finally at the point of launching publicly as the Climate Majority Project. That's going to happen in a month's time. You can already find us on the web at climatemajorityproject.com, and you can also find, if you want, there or elsewhere, footage of me and other colleagues on telly or whatever talking about it. But yeah, it's been mostly under the radar-ish so far. It's going to launch publicly next month. We've already got six-figure funding. We're hoping for a lot more. So, one very good way of using that money I was talking about earlier might be to put it towards us. A lot of the money that we get, we put straight out the door, as I was briefly describing, to incubate others, to incubate organizations that we think are especially potentially strong examples of what we're trying to bring. And yes, hopefully you'll be hearing a lot more of us. But it's perhaps important to stress, as I sought to indicate at a number of points in my little talk, that this is not going to be a thing like XR, which is sort of one thing with one kind of identity. The most important thing about what we're trying to bring is supporting, incubating, networking, etc. This stuff which is springing up all over the place, in workplaces, in businesses, in communities, in campaigning, which all kind of fits together in something which is going to be, we hope and believe, a kind of gigantic wave, which is going to get larger and larger and is going to come to more and more self-awareness, but will be very ground up and will be composed of these relatively discrete elements. One phrase that we use that is perhaps helpful in order to kind of sum this up is that the next big thing is going to be lots of little things. It isn't going to be one big thing, it's going to be lots of little things that kind of all go in broadly the same direction, and people start to realize, something's really happening here. And as more and more people realize that we can't outsource this to our leaders, that's how we see the political culture of this country and eventually of many countries around the world changing in the kind of way that it needs to change. Does that help? John, thank you for that clarificatory question. Yes, sir?
Sounds great. I can't wait to get involved in that. One thing, of course, is that it's obviously this is a bit of a global problem. Is this something that can be modelled and used in other, or is that already happening?
Yeah, thank you. So we're trying to prove concept in Britain first, but of course you're right, and for that reason we're already liaising with people in Germany, the United States, Australia, and eventually we hope to be liaising with, offering assistance to, learning from people all around the world. Stuff like this is already happening and arising simultaneously. There's a kind of zeitgeist thing here in a number of places, including definitely in Canada, the US, Germany, Australasia, India. Yeah. Back there and then down here.
Why do you think it is that political, financial figures seem more afraid of the change that you're proposing than they do of becoming environmental catastrophe if nothing happens? What, they use terms like eco-terrorists, eco-zealots, or
yes.
Why is that? Do they not believe in the change that will happen?
Yeah, very important question. It's obviously quite a complex question. Let me say a couple of key things about it. First thing to say is to remind us that some of the people who talk that way are standing for election next week, and you should get rid of them. And you have a once in a lifetime opportunity in a true bluish place like this to elect Greens and good Lib Dems and whoever else next week, and obviously that opportunity has to be seized. Next point to make is in terms of the big picture. Part of what's happening is that people are trying to turn this into a culture war issue. They're trying to make some cheap, short-term political capital by engaging polarized discussions, by trying to mobilize hate against the radical flank and so forth. One of the central things that we're trying to do, and this is why we work in cooperation with people from the radical flank like Just Stop Oil, people from the old moderate flank like the RSPB, with people across the political spectrum, including conservatives like Lord Deben, who are decent people who don't do this kind of thing. One of the central things we need to do and we need to bring here is a spirit of post-polarization or anti-polarization or non-polarization, unpolarization. And that is built into the DNA of the Climate Majority Project. We think it's absolutely essential. There is no way we get through this without overcoming that tendency to polarization. And that's one reason why we think what we're bringing is really important, because an issue with Extinction Rebellion and with Just Stop Oil is that they do polarize, and to some extent they do it deliberately. It's built into their methodology. And that contradicts the endeavor that we made in XR while I was in XR to try to be non-party political and non-ideological and not naming, shaming and blaming. All of that stuff in XR was really, really good. But the methodology was essentially predicated on polarization. It was about forcing a national conversation by forcing people to confront people in the street who weren't moving, etc., etc. So we believe strongly that what is needed now is something which is deliberately unpolarizing. And that's what we're going to try to bring. It's going to be incredibly difficult, but there is no way we get through this without succeeding, because there is no way we get through this without the overwhelming majority coming on side. Because this is not the kind of issue that you can sort through a revolution or through an elite technocratic means. You can't win if you've only got 3.5% of the population or whatever on your side, because climate encompasses virtually every aspect, virtually everything that we do. It's not like the ozone hole issue, for example, which corporates and political leaders could sort just among themselves in the 1980s. This needs everyone. We need a sort of complete mobilization of the citizenry, and that's what we're going to try to help to co-create.
So just following on from that polarisation, I'm very concerned about the next movement that's brewing, which is the freedom movement. So the 15-minute cities, which was an example in Oxford, there's been a massive uprising there about stemming people's freedom of movement, essentially. So how do we, I guess, educate that movement? How do we bring them on board? You're saying you want to sort of get rid of polarisation. Like, how do we actually do that? Because we're just the ones on the ground actually having those conversations. How do we suggest it? Because that movement is gathering, and it's already in like the council at Glastonbury. They're having very serious debates about this movement that's coming, that is going to be stopping our carbon emissions and essentially closing down our freedoms.
Yeah.
So how can we do that? That's quite serious. As soon as you take away freedom, they're going to be anti.
It's a great question, a very challenging question, of course. First, people at the back. So the question is the freedom movement, which is calling out, for example, 15-minute cities as a kind of alleged sort of totalitarianism, when it's really just about kind of enabling people not to have to take long car journeys all the time, and so on. This freedom movement, how do we talk to people who are attracted by it in a way such that we make real this spirit of post-polarization? First thing I'll say, this is just a kind of an aside and a joke, but there is a serious point to it, it is kind of amusing at the least to note that a lot of these same people who are saying they're going to stop our freedom of movement are the precise same people who were saying it's terrible that we're in the EU because it allows freedom of movement. And the serious point there is that quite a lot of the people who are behind this kind of thing don't have any principles and are just trying to create a culture war in which they enlist other people and manipulate those people. And one way in which you can challenge what's going on there is through exposing that. But for most people, that isn't going to be it. We have to do the kind of thing you were talking about, find ways of talking to people and engaging with them and making these things real, such that they no longer feel so isolated, got at, powerless, etc. So, and there are some clues, right? If we can find ways of actually talking with people and empowering them and getting them to feel less isolated, then I think we start to be able to strike at the roots of this kind of temptation. So something like community climate action can do that. So the sort of HQ of our community climate action project in the Climate Majority Project is in North Suffolk and South Norfolk. And it's a very conservative, small and large C area, and the Brexit voting area and so forth. And part of the way that they're doing it is that they're creating events on the land where they're growing food and at the pub that they've taken over and are running as a social enterprise, which is very interesting and a useful model, I think, where they bring people in and have kind of sort of convened conversations with them and try to get people talking to each other, getting to know their neighbours, etc., getting to see that these new people, some of them are new to the area, working on the land, etc., are not kind of those sort of hippies, crusties, activists, etc., but are just people who want to have a better future and actually very like them and who like decent local beer in a pub that we can all be part of together. And you get the idea. It's things like that. Another of the organisations that we incubate is called MP Watch, and they watch climate dubious MPs from all parties. Most of them are Conservatives, not all. There are still a few climate deniers in the Labour Party, incredibly. And part of their methodology is that they go door to door and have non-partisan conversations with people. So it's the same kind of idea of trying to bring people together as citizens and expose the tiny minority who are deliberately creating polarization as the problem, not other people in the community.
But
So,
sorry, just on that.
yeah.
The main work to be done is being localised rather than online. Do you think that we need to have
So there's lots that we can do online, clearly, but roughly, yes. I think that it's kind of an illusion that to think that everything can be sorted online. Online communities are often kind of shallow and prone to polarization unless they build on pre-existing strong ties. So that's why, for example, probably the most important positive contribution, there aren't many, that Facebook has made to humanity is through having groups like, there's a Facebook group for my local village. And that's useful, right? Unlike virtually everything else that Facebook has done. Why is it useful? Because it builds on a pre-existing community. It helps to enrich that community, right? It's not trying to create something out of nowhere, which is inherently kind of fragile and thin. So of course there's all sorts of wonderful things we can do with online tools, but at the end of the day, for human beings, I think there's no substitute for working with people who you know, strengthening those ties. That's why we say a lot of the encouragement to change the world in recent years has been be a good voter or be a good consumer. And both of those things are essentially things that people do as individuals without any real association with other people. And that's weak. What we say is build on strong ties. So create and enrich and activate the climate majority through strong ties that are already to some extent exist and can be strengthened. So that means through extended families, through churches, through neighborhoods, through workplaces, through professions, through businesses. These are the places where we think we'll remake the future, and these are the places where we think we have the greatest chance to build resistance to the massive centrifugal forces that are coming as our society goes through extremely challenging times over the next generation. Yes, sir?
Yes, with your philosophical hat, it seems to me that there's two underlying issues that makes the challenge in responding. The first is the tendency for humans to prioritise short-term issues and dangers ahead of long-term. And of course, the climate has always been something in the future. And the second is that we have tended to deal with issues, with mono issues, with a kind of race-like focus, one thing at a time. Whereas, of course, the issues we're facing are very holistic. It's very hard to point to one thing.
You're right.
It always worries me, for example, focusing purely on carbon emissions. Where very often reducing carbon emissions creates a problem with biodiversity.
Absolutely.
So how, and it feels to me that those are philosophical human failings. How do we deal with
They are to some extent. Only to some extent, though. If you look back with a longer view across the history of humanity, there have been civilizations that were a lot better at looking long-term and a lot better at looking holistically. Some of them are still around today in some indigenous cultures, some peasant societies. If we look back into history, for example, consider the building of cathedrals, right? Some Gothic cathedrals took 100 years to build, at a time when the average life expectancy was about 30 odd years. So just think about that, you know? Somebody was brought up in a cathedral, was born in a cathedral town, and the cathedral foundations were built, and they died and the cathedral was half built, and this was just totally normal, you know? Imagine a politician say, yes, and I'm delighted today to be laying the foundations of this 100-year project. That just doesn't happen, you know. Imagine a politician at an election saying, well, the most important issue at this election is what this community is going to be like in 150 years' time. It just never ever happens, does it? But there have been times and places where that kind of long-term thinking was more established. So it has happened before, it can happen again. It's going to be a big task. So the other part of what we need to do, because it's going to be a big task, is we need to concentrate people's minds and get them to realise that it isn't just about the long term. That's where this thing about adaptation comes in, right? We've made a mistake, I think, in communications around climate by saying, well, what we need to do is focus on the reduction of carbon emissions and think about the date by which we want to go to zero or net zero. Dates like 2050 do sound awfully far off to people in our society with relatively short-term time horizons. The more we get people thinking about, this is about how you live here and now and your preparedness for stuff that may be coming as soon as this summer, then you're into a situation where you're concentrating minds more in ways that they need to be concentrated. Finally, on the point about how climate is not just about carbon, yeah, you're absolutely right. So in the Climate Majority Project, we want to encourage exactly the kind of holistic views you're talking about, bringing in, for starters, biodiversity. Now, one of the big advantages of that is that actually lots of people in this country really care about nature and really care about wildlife. Lots of Conservatives, for example, care about conservation. Clues in the name. So that's a good thing, right? By making this set of issues more joined up on holistic in that way, we can actually bring more people on board, and that makes it potentially easier to assemble a majority. Ultimately, even the frame of climate and nature is too narrow. We face what some people are calling a polycrisis. You know, we haven't said a word about the rise of AI, about the threat of the nuclear war, about the coming pandemics, because COVID is almost certainly just the beginning. Climate degradation is going to make us much more vulnerable to many more pandemics. And there's other stuff as well we could be talking about that's in the mix here. This can seem kind of overwhelming. The answer is the same. Handle it together, take meaningful action on it together, and make sense of the whole thing together as something which is coming, a trend which is emerging. But what's also important is to enable people to understand that that these things, they sound very diverse. You know, AI, nuclear war, biodiversity. But a lot of it comes down to the same very, very simple things. You know, what if we had a community, a country, a world where people prioritise human well-being in the context of nature being okay so that it can last? What if they thought about what their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren really need? What if we rebuilt security? What if we rebuilt community? What if we had more tastier local food, more in our own control? What if we didn't have to depend on stuff that comes from so far away all the time? It all points in the same direction. It all does actually join up. And basically most people kind of know that, I think. They know that there's something really wrong with the way that they live. What they haven't been offered yet is a way of getting to that better way of living, or that better place. But we think and believe that the opportunity for that is now emerging.
On a scale of 1 to 10, if you have something now treating you philosophy of renewable 1, and Jen Bendel's deep adaptation, systems collapse, decommissioning nuclear power stations of 10, where do you think we are?
Okay, what a super question. So my answer is slightly complex. You may not be aware that I wrote the book on deep adaptation with Jen Bendel. So obviously I'm sympathetic to some elements of his analysis. The difference between Jem and myself is that Jem believes that collapse is inevitable, whereas I only think it's probable. And that's quite an important difference, because what I think we should be doing is aiming to transform our world such that we don't collapse. What I think is inevitable is that everything is going to change. Either everything's going to change because we collapse, or everything's going to change because we change it such that we don't collapse. What's not available is just continuing with some version of business as usual. So in terms of the numbers, I'm sort of at both kind of, I'm at like somewhere in the middle and at 10 as well. I think we have to engage in deep adaptation, which means that we have to prepare for potential collapse. We have to be ready for a future in which we won't be able to depend on food coming to us from other countries, etc., etc., etc. We have to be ready to make nuclear power stations safe and so forth. But I also think that we should be aiming for a world in which we don't have to endure collapse, and that is still possible, although it's going to be very difficult now. What is completely impossible now is any kind of version of business as usual, and what is also impossible now is a serene, smooth transition. The coming years are going to be extremely bumpy. Whether we find some way of kind of coalescing, overcome polarization, make increasingly from the ground up till we get governments to change as well, the changes that we need or not, that's the question which will determine whether or not we change everything by way of transformation or by way of collapse. Maybe, but we're running close to the end. Are there more questions from new people? Okay, you have a go.
I just wanted to know what you mean by resilience community. Is it self-sustaining?
in terms of its own food, its own water, its own shelter.
Okay. So look, it's really about direction of travel here. You know, you don't have to become completely self-sufficient. What it's about, it seems to me, is not being completely unself-sufficient, right? Looking at it from sort of the other end of the telescope. Or, put it another way, it's about having kind of buffers. So, myself and my wife have a third of an acre now. We call it a tiny holding on a hill on the edge of the Norfolk Broads. And we're trying to do what we can to encourage the growth of community resilience in and around our village. We're doing that for numerous reasons, including that it's lovely. But one of the reasons is that we think that this could potentially buy us and our village some time in relation to potential future crises. And a little bit of time could go a long way. You know, if you have in your village, say, enough food to support you all for 3 months, that is a very different situation from if you have enough food to support you all for 3 days. So I don't think it's an absolute kind of question. The question is not kind of, are you resilient or are you unresilient? The question is, how can we build more resilience than we currently have? Yeah?
What's like eating wins in terms of reducing damage and suffering in, like, say, developing countries, third world countries?
Yeah. So, in terms of the Global South, the first point to make is the Global South are greatly harmed by untruthfulness. So long as we go on pretending that everything's going to be fine, and we're going to sort everything out, we're going to mitigate our way out of this. Technology and political leadership are going to solve things, and we'll get through this without any big issues. Then people in the Global South are going to suffer horrendously. Climate justice begins with acknowledging how deadly the current situation is. That we're already way out of the safe zone, into the danger zone. As I say, I think most people already kind of sense this at some level. It's just not mostly discussed. Once we discuss it and kind of surface it and process it together and act on the basis of it, then we can help ourselves more, and we can help people in the Global South more. Where that needs to start is with proper funding for adaptation and for loss and damage. Right? People in the Global South desperately need money to deal with the disasters that they're suffering from and to enable them to adapt their systems transformatively. And we are feeding them an illusion when we say, well, it's okay, we're going to sort out the global carbon emissions and then these problems will stop. They're not going to stop. They're going to go on and on, getting worse for a long time to come, even if we do the best things we possibly can, which is what we should be doing. So there's lots more to say in answer to your question, but that would be my central point, that to get anywhere on climate justice, we must start with being truthful and frank, and that enables us to get serious about adaptation here and abroad.
Sorry, Paula, I know she wants to ask another question, and I'm sure we could be here for another hour to discuss this. So, thank you very much, Rupert. That was a really insightful and talk which gave us a lot of food for thought. And you mentioned community a lot and how we need to come together. And I think this is a good time to talk about why we're all here today with the Sevenoaks Community Action Network, which started, 18 months ago, and a small group of people, and gradually this movement was built up. And we're here at the fair with hundreds of people, and one of the reasons I joined is I felt there was no one in Sevenoaks who sort of had the same views as me, and I found that just the amount of people who share my views, who come together, and I now feel more empowered to do things. And it's really exciting to see everyone here today, and actually to hear that this is one of the ways we will, if we get to get out of this mess, this is how we do it.
Yeah, it's happening in lots of places.
So it's really exciting, and it's quite optimistic, some of the stuff you said. I know, our future's a bit uncertain, but it's really good to know that we can hopefully together try and solve our way out of it. So if anybody would like to join the scan, we have a stall out there. Anyway, thank you so much for coming today, and all the way from East Anglia as well. Really appreciate it, because you're not, local to us. So please put your hands together to